I'm pleased to introduce this evening's speaker. We are joined by Jon Norman-Mason. Jon works in the BSMS Student Wellbeing and Advice team. At BSMS, students can meet with student advisors to discuss concerns or issues they are facing and to understand their options for support. So Jon has been a student advisor at BSMS since 2009 and has worked in student welfare since 2005. He also teaches storytelling skills as part of the BSMS medicine degree, and he has a PhD exploring how imagination and stories help us to make sense of experience. So, Jon, thank you so much for coming to speak tonight, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Agatha, and thanks everyone for coming along and listening. I'm really looking forward to sharing some of these thoughts with you. First of all, I am going to share my screen, and I would like to, if this works, I would like to start with a bit of a question for you, actually. Um, Hopefully you can all see this. You'll see that there is a QR code which you can use, or you can go to slido.com and enter the numeric code that's given in the bottom left of the screen. And there you will be able to answer the question, what do you think doctors are like, medics are like? And what I mean by that is, what single word would you use to describe a person who's a doctor? Great, we've got an answer coming up already. Thank you. Caring, compassionate, responsible. What are the things? Diligent, kind, empathetic. Oh, that's getting a lot of emphasis there. Overworked is there? Well, yeah, maybe sometimes, and it's good to be realistic about these things. Hardworking comes up as well. Gosh, lots more. Professional, brave. That's interesting. Understanding, heroes. That's very interesting. Hard working is getting bigger. Serious, lots of thinking. Yes, yes, absolutely. Confident, curious, hungry. I wonder if that's connected with underpaid that's there as well. Certainly, we can all agree that people doing such valuable work do deserve to be rewarded appropriately for it. This is great. Thank you very much, everyone. Amazing. Oh, that's a nice one to chip in there as well. Um, Emotionally intelligent, solemn. That's interesting. Gosh, there's so much to go on here as well. I mean, compared to solemn as well, we also have grumpy. And I'm terribly sorry if some of you have had those experiences as well of coming across grumpy doctors. Multifaceted, I like, because clearly that is going to have to be. It is quite a multi-pronged role, really, isn't it? It requires a lot of different skills, sometimes all at once. And so, yeah, there are a lot of different qualities that come into play. Um, okay, well, this is fantastic, guys. So I think we can all quite clearly see that the biggest, most common things that come out here are empathetic, but also hardworking, kind, and smart. I can see a couple of people are still typing, so I'll wait and see if that changes things a lot. But this is plenty to think about. Yeah, I'd love you all if you could to keep as many of these ideas in your mind as you can as we go through the talk today. Yeah, we have had a few more come up. Communicative, important, cynical, perhaps, like along with the maybe the overworked and underpaid sort of things that can sometimes have that effect on people. Sadly, yes. Um, but this is great, wonderful. Thanks, guys. Okay, so I'll press on now. But like I say, it's good to bear these things in mind. These are the sorts of ideas that we would all, I think, yeah, a lot of us would agree. These are the things that spring to mind when you think of the idea of clinician, of medic, doctor, the sort of person that must be. Now, can I? Is it? There we go. Managed to cope with the tech and moved on. So, as you might have seen, my talk today is on the subject of healing thyself, medics, stories, and looking after yourself. And this is drawing on all different sides of my own work, really. So my work as a student advisor here at BSMS, like Agatha says, I've been here for a long while, since 2009. Also, my work teaching storytelling skills and researching the role of storytelling and understanding things through stories in how we as human beings make sense of things. And I will explain more about what I mean by that as we go. First of all, I would like to just introduce the student wellbeing and advice team here at BSMS, because as Agatha said, we do have a dedicated service here, and I think they all deserve the credit for the work that they do. So this is the team of advisors. There are several of us, as you can see, Lizzie, Sarah, Tanya, Tabitha, and there myself, Handsome Devil, in the corner. But we are ably supported by our student support coordinators, Ian and Paul, who are sort of the first port of call for queries and who can book people appointments with the advisors, can provide initial advice and information. And then Jess, who is the one member of the team who has done all the different jobs in the team in her time. And at the moment, she is a wellbeing projects officer. So she does all sorts of interesting proactive stuff to arrange activities and information campaigns and trying to anticipate and meet student needs when it comes to wellbeing, welfare, and advice. And this isn't all. This isn't all, because we work closely under the direction and advice of Dr. Katie Hurt, who is a respiratory consultant and also director of student support here at BSMS. And she has a deputy, Andrea Pepper, Dr. Andrea Pepper, who is a lab technician, lab researcher, I should say, academic doctor, who also has a great interest in the welfare and support provision for students. And so together, the two of them oversee a lot of our work and help us, again, be proactive in meeting students' needs. So that's who we are. And part of the reason we're here is so that when life happens, as it does to all of us, whether we want it to or not, and that's okay, that's nothing to be embarrassed about, then we can offer meetings in person or online, or even phone conversations if that works for you. I know, not many people do that anymore, but we can if you want to, on any of the issues that can come up during your time at university. So whether that's a physical health complaint, mental health issues, navigating the university processes and regulations that you might face at different times, long-term conditions that might be classed as a disability, or anything that you might need learning support with for neurodivergence or whatever, then we can help you contact the right people. Or if you just need space to talk about stuff that's going on that's affecting your studies, so that might be relationship issues or family issues, worries about money. Again, we can point you in the right direction to get support with that. Housing problems. Again, life happens to us all, and we understand that, and so nobody wants you to be disadvantaged as and when it does. So that's why we're here. The other reason that we're here, specifically as a dedicated team in the medical school here at Brighton and Sussex, is because, as we know, being a clinician is frequently one of the most rewarding, stimulating, and satisfying jobs that you can do. But it is also hard at times. And I think that was reflected in some of the words that came up at the beginning. Hard working was there. It is often a job that involves long hours, long shifts, antisocial shift patterns, you might say, and working late nights, early mornings, weekends, holidays, and because that's the job, and I am continuously just full of admiration for those of you who seek to take on this role, because we all need you, and so well done you. I can't say it enough. But yeah, this does take its toll on you because it is tiring. And obviously, of course, you will face stressful situations as well. And as you can see, the picture on the right was taken from an article about physician burnout, which sometimes is a noted issue that doctors themselves need support. But what I've noticed in my many years as a student advisor in a medical school is that nobody necessarily wants to have to be the person who's coming to seek support, and sometimes everybody's a little bit embarrassed about it. But it does seem that medics or medics in training are perhaps more averse than most, more reluctant than the average to actually come forward and seek help when it's needed, to admit that they are struggling, perhaps, that they are hard worked and maybe face challenging situations as part of their work, and that maybe they can't keep just sort of soldiering on and acting like they're this monolithic machine that can cope with everything. And I think my own personal feeling from the many people that I've worked with over my years here at BSMS is that part of this comes from the image of doctor that we absorb from, whoever your favorite TV doctor is. Some of the people might be calling in from all over the world. Hopefully, at least some of these you're familiar with, because there's transatlantic options here. But the the versions of doctors that we're exposed to from fictional drama series, from public figures who, are clinicians who go on to achieve fame and public acclaim for their work outside clinical settings, promoting awareness and understanding and speaking on different issues. All of this, I think, can shape our idea of what's expected of a doctor, can shape what we expect of ourselves, yourselves as potential clinicians. And also beyond that, between all of these different points, there's the general blurry sort of glow, if you like, of social attitudes towards what makes a doctor, that we absorb from the discussions around us, from attitudes shown within our family, within our school, just out in the public in general, without even knowing we're doing it. This all very much shapes our sense of what doctors are supposed to be like. And this is, I believe, very much because human experience is fundamentally shaped by stories. This might sound like a slightly strange idea, maybe, but it is true. I firmly believe this is true. It might not be the only thing that shapes our experience or our understanding of things, but it is a vital one that we overlook at our peril, really. So to explain this idea a little bit further, the late, great Terry Pratchett, who some of you may have heard of as an author, the way he put it was that Homo sapiens, the name of our species, is not really the most appropriate name for us. As he says here, we are not Homo sapiens, wise man. Now, there are many different reasons why you could say that that's inappropriate, but the one specific one that he was talking about here was the most significant contribution that our large brain made to our approach to the universe was to endow us with the power of story. We are, in fact, pan-narrans, the storytelling ape. That is what Terry Pratchett proposed as an alternative scientific classification for our species. And in fact, there is an awful lot of research done by evolutionary biologists and by psychologists as well to back up this idea that storytelling, shaping information and experience as a narrative, an exciting, satisfying narrative with a beginning and a middle and a twist at the end or whatever, is actually part of our science, part of our makeup, part of our genetic evolution, part of our behavioral evolution. It is hardwired into what makes us human. And this is something that comes very much from exactly the kind of social organization that we share with our closest evolutionary relatives, such as chimpanzees here. So, For example, there's an evolutionary psychologist called Robin Dunbar who suggests that whereas our earliest relatives would, like our cousins, have indulged in grooming behavior like this, when you often see on wildlife documentaries or whatever, chimpanzees or monkeys or whoever it is, going through each other's fur, combing through each other's fur with their fingers, picking out insects and bits of plants and things that might be irritating us. And it's not just about helping each other out. It's about bonding. The physical contact and the process of gently grooming boosts endorphins in the brain that are associated with strong social connections, feeling like, yes, we are part of the group. And this is because, just like humans, all of these primate ancestors and relatives of ours are social animals. They have evolved not to be a sole lone hunter that goes it by itself, goes it alone and only depends on itself, but to depend on the group for survival. If you look out for me, I'll look out for you, and we're both more likely to make it through another day on the savannah, dealing with lions and hyenas and lightning and floods and whatever. We exist by being a communal society, really. But obviously, human society at some point got a lot bigger. The population group, the size of the groups got bigger. Um, the social interactions and activities got more and more complex. People might be required to spend time away from the group for long periods hunting and then coming back. And so you cannot cement the bonds by physical grooming on its own in the same way, because it's just not feasible. There's too many people, and it would get in the way of doing jobs that need to be done. So Robin Dunbar, who I mentioned before, his argument was that actually humans evolved a series of other activities, interactions, which have exactly the same effect of boosting endorphins associated with social connection. And these activities, in order, if I can remember them correctly, were first of all laughing, and then singing, and then dancing, I think, and then storytelling, and then feasting, and then shared religious activity was the final one. But storytelling is in there. Storytelling is part of it. And other evolutionary psychologists have done studies pointing out things like, if you can demonstrate to the group that you're very good at spotting unusual details which might be relevant to survival, like a threat or something lucky, so a source of food or other resources. If you're good at spotting the unusual and then communicating the unusual successfully to the rest of the group, you're a useful person to have around. And you might prove yourself to be quite socially successful, and maybe it's your genes that then get passed on a little bit more. And so storytelling itself becomes part of the adaptive toolkit that humans evolved. There've even been studies to show that brain chemistry actually sort of mirrors between the teller and the audience. So that might, in some ways, mean that whatever my brain is doing right now, yours is starting to do the same, which, to be honest, I find to be a terrifying amount of responsibility to put on my shoulders. But anyway, so this is the argument that storytelling is an important part of what makes us tick, of how we work as humans. And this does keep on working in the present day in terms of what we expect of ourselves and what we expect of others. And the philosopher Alistair MacIntyre puts it so well, I think, that I think it's worth quoting him at length. So as he says here, we now, and I should say, when he says we, from the example that he's talking about, these are very much white European examples of stories, and this sort of white European diaspora to North America, Australasia. But I think the principle is sound and universal. As he says, we enter human society with one or more imputed characters, roles into which we've been drafted. And we have to learn what they are in order to be able to understand how others respond to us and how our responses to them are apt to be construed. It is through hearing stories about wicked stepmothers, lost children, good but misguided kings, wolves that suckle twin boys, youngest sons who receive no inheritance but must make their own way in the world, and eldest sons who waste their inheritance on riotous living and go into exile to live with the swine. It is through all of these folklore, legendary fairy tale characters that Alistair McIntyre is talking about. It is through them that children, he says, learn or mislearn what the cast of characters may be in the drama into which they've been born and what the ways of the world are. So, what this really underlines is that stories, as a way of arranging and communicating information, are an invaluable teaching tool to us as social animals, because the way that people act in the stories that we are exposed to is an object lesson in what we can expect people to do and how we might therefore act ourselves. It gives us a script, it gives us a role model to follow. Now, what I have learned through my academic studies, which I find fascinating, is although Alistair McIntyre talks about this being something that happens to us when we're children and the sort of stories we're exposed to in early life, actually, that's not necessarily the full story. Oral historians such as Penny Summerfield here have shown that this happens all the way through our lives. So, as this quote says, discourses from popular culture inform personal identity, personal stories, the narratives that we construct to explain who we are to others and to explain who we are to ourselves are still throughout our whole lives informed by the stories we're exposed to. In the study that I took this quote from, then she uses the example of research that's been done with Australian veterans of the world wars, who, when interviewed later in life in the late 20th century about their experiences, actually could be seen to make their story of their own life conform to this movie, Gallipoli, which was an incredibly important, influential bit of Australian cinema in the early 80s that told the story of the working class Australian experience of life in World War. So people were sort of absorbing that version of the narrative and without even thinking about it, telling their own story in a way that fit that didn't disrupt the commonly agreed version of events and that maybe made them feel a bit more validated, that they could identify themselves with these characters who were the heroes of the big movie. The way that Summerfield summarizes this is that the narrator seeks a sense of composure from constituting themselves as the subject of the story. That is to say, life storytelling involves an endeavor to achieve the state of being calm and in control of oneself, and that is the pursuit of personal equanimity and psychic comfort, and hence the term composure for this process, because it is about achieving that sort of emotional composure as well as the process of composing a story about yourself. One of the best ways I think we can see this happening around us in real time in society is fashion subcultures. I think whenever we adopt elements of subcultural style, be that a hippie, a punk, the hip hop look, then there is an element of playing dress up as the characters in the stories that we know who act like that, who dress like that. We are taking on that role by taking on the costume and writing this story about ourselves where we present ourselves to the world as, I am like that character that you know. But it's not just about fashion choices and it's not just about musical choices as well. It does happen more deeply. And so, if you'll permit me, I would like to share with you a little bit of personal reflection on how stories have shaped my own sense of identity and purpose in the world. Now, as you can see here, I was a child of the 1980s. And as a male child in the Western world in the 1980s, then I was given these sort of archetypes to aspire to. The sort of characters in the stories that I was watching were these heroes, manly heroes who went out and fought evil physically, actually, even though, of course, school and parents made it clear that that wasn't the only way of doing it. But the evil happens, injustices are inflicted upon innocent people, and so we need heroes to go out and make things better. And that really, really stayed with me. That really, really gave me quite a hard and fast binary kind of sense of morality as a child. What's fair, what's unfair, and what we have to do about it. And I've got to admit, I've never really escaped that, but it has been developed, not just through my own experience, but through more stories. So I can still remember quite how much my life was changed at the age of about 6, maybe 5, probably 6, by this character in the Transformers cartoon. Now, those of you who aren't familiar with the Transformers cartoon of the 1980s may not realize, but this is Jetfire, also known as Skyfire. And Jetfire was a huge, big robot, much bigger than most Transformers. And as you can see, he has a huge, big gun and turns into an aeroplane. You can see bits of the wings there. All very good, action-packed, exciting stuff. But on the back of the toy box, it said that Jetfire was actually a scientist. And Jetfire's personal motto was that knowledge is the key to victory. And for me, this was wonderful because I was never a particularly athletic jock type. I was always the bookish nerd. And this was such great validation for me that actually, no, even if you're 25 feet tall and have a massive gun, you can pursue justice through knowledge, through study. And this was great to hear. But the even better bit, the thing that really changed my world, was that I'd acquired, as I say, this really binary view of there are goodies, there are baddies. Baddies must be dealt with. Goodies are the ones who do that. But in the cartoon of Transformers, Jetfire was a baddie who changed sides. And that blew my childish mind. And I am still feeling the aftershock of that. Here I am now in my mid-40s telling you this. But yeah, I'd never come across this idea before, that actually it's not about the team you're in. It's not about the badge you wear. It's not about the category that society puts you in. It's all about the choices you make. Jetfire was part of the Decepticons, the evil team, looked around, didn't like what they were doing to the world, wanted to do something different. And so in pursuit of his own integrity and in pursuit of doing right by the world, changed sides and became one of the Autobots, the good guys. And I just thought that was beautiful, and I still do. And there is still, I've got to admit, some quite sort of hard, punishing, really demanding sense of morality in my sense of what I ought to expect of myself. And it was this particular scene from the Superman movie Man of Steel from a few years ago that really made me realize just how much I was expecting myself to be this figure who endured for the sake of everyone to make things better, put up with suffering. And so I'm doing a lot these days to try and overcome that and be a little bit more soft and flexible and give myself a break, basically. But it is still the case that the characters that I am most often drawn to are, like Wolverine here, those who are aware of their own failings and work to overcome that. So I feel like I'm in a slightly better place now. So that's me. That's it. Hopefully not sharing a bit more than you were bargaining for, but hopefully I've given you an idea here of how stories shape experience, shape identity, shape what we expect of ourselves. So let's have a think now about some of the stories that affect our expectations of medics, things that we absorb from the world, and that maybe might have been reflected in some of the words that came up at the beginning. One of them certainly did, actually, and I don't mean any criticism here, but it is interesting that the word heroes did come up. The idea that medics are heroes, which, clearly is one way of acknowledging the amazing work that medics do and which we're all very grateful for, but does also create this very sort of superhuman expectation of somebody who is consistently strong, and morally unimpeachable, and who is always the one stepping into the breach to, metaphorically fight the good fight for us all, and never gives up and won't tire and maybe won't even rest if there's still work to be done. And that's a lot to ask of someone. That's a lot to ask of yourself. And it links into another story, which I think is very common, which is, of course, that doctors are perfect. I mean, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember when George Clooney was Doug Ross in ER, but he not only was so wonderfully, winsomely handsome, but he was this amazingly bottomlessly caring person. He might have been a bit of a maverick and might have upset the bosses, but that's because he knew what the patients really needed, and he would never give up on a patient. And if he ever made any mistakes, then they weren't really mistakes. They were just the right thing to do, even if it meant slightly disagreeing with his boss. But it was all for the good of the patient. Another common story that again, we absorb without even thinking about it is, of course, that doctors are high status. That this is a very, very socially important position that carries with it a lot of privilege, and that is privilege that is entirely deserved, and that being a doctor maybe entitles you to different treatment or a level of respect. And, I'm not saying it doesn't deserve respect, but respect, of course, is something that is earned by your actions, and doesn't necessarily just come with the stethoscope and the white coat. And so all of these expectations, I think, are there in the mix for a lot of us when we consider what it means to be a medic of any description, really. And I think this is a big part of why, as I said, a lot of medics in training or medics in practice struggle when it comes to admitting that they're maybe not doing too well and maybe they could do with a bit of help. Because if these three ideas are your idea of what a doctor is, then what happens if you don't feel you're living up to that? What does that do inside if you don't feel you are properly playing the role of doctor as you saw played out on television and movie screens all through your life, or as society seemed to think was required of you? It's tough. It's a lot. It's a lot to ask of yourself, and creates this a lot of tension and discomfort, I think. Now, I don't want to make out that this is all miserable and it's a terrible situation, because a lot is being done to recognize this these days, more and more and more. We had an article about clinician burnout earlier, and actually the British Medical Association, among many other professional organizations, do an awful lot of active, proactive work to encourage doctors to seek support, and provide that support themselves here with counselling, peer support, a directory of outside services, confidential hot helpline. So yeah, it's not as if you are completely left to your own to cope. People are there, willing, wanting to help you cope. But I do think that in order to engage with that, we need to help. Well, in order to help doctors to engage with that as much as help ourselves, really, then we need to help by providing more stories about doctors, different stories about doctors, other stories about what it is to be a working clinician. For example, that doctors are human, and that's a good thing. You are just like your patient. You are exactly the same species. And there, but for the grace of God or fate or whatever you call it, there goes you. You could be in the same situation as them. In fact, because doctors are human, this does mean doctors get sick. That happens. And that's okay. It also means that doctors get better, which is great. And so getting sick isn't actually necessarily a career-ending injury, so to speak, is it? It's something that you can roll with, and that your colleagues will, accept, because they're just the same as you. And that common humanity, I think, is actually the basis for a really good, caring, empathetic, kind relationship with your patient. Doctors do heroic things. And I say it again, I am so full of admiration for anybody who does this work. We all very much depend upon it. And so, yeah, anybody doing it deserves our respect. But I think framing it as a doctor is a human who does heroic things creates a lot less stress than a doctor is a hero. Not that I'm disagreeing with the fact that hero came up earlier, but yeah, hero is quite a two-dimensional, solid all the way through kind of image in many ways. A human who does heroic things is in some ways even more impressive because they are as soft and as fragile and sometimes flawed as the rest of us, but they can still do this stuff. Doctors are always learning. Doctors don't have to be perfect because there's always going to be stuff which you haven't come across before. In fact, medical schools like BSMS are constantly encouraging you to always be up to date with the research and don't approach an unknown situation as a failing on your part. Approach it as an opportunity to learn, and you don't have to worry about the sudden urgency of needing to fix a problem by yourself, because of course you can learn from your team. You are part of a team of equals a lot of the time. And even where somebody has gained a higher position, then that is a position of administrative and decision-making responsibility rather than extra brownie points of somehow being a better sort of human, because that's not how it works. So, yeah, these are stories, I think, that we should encourage about what it is to be a doctor. And of course, one of the most important things there is doctors do ask for help. And I can prove this to you as well. This isn't just me being overly optimistic or rose-tinted about the life of a clinician, because the General Medical Council of the United Kingdom themselves, in their document, Achieving Good Medical Practice, which sets out guidance and standards of medical students, then it does actually state categorically, you should think about the impact your health might have on your ability to study or to sit an assessment. Just as doctors in practice need to be able to determine whether they are well enough to care for their patients, so as a medical student, you would be expected to determine if you are well enough to fully engage with the course, including assessments, and to raise this with your medical school and seek independent medical advice, if appropriate. Your medical school will support you to develop this awareness, and they will. They genuinely will, because it's a vital professional skill. And they go on. As a medical student, during study and on placements, you might experience situations that will have an emotional impact on you. That's okay. This is completely normal. Your school will support you. If you're concerned about levels of anxiety, seek help from a general practitioner or other sources. And, further still, they even would say you must tell your medical school about serious health problems or any aspect of your health or circumstances that could affect your training, because that means your school can support you. And it can only do this if it knows you have a problem. Telling your medical school, and this is possibly the most important line of this whole presentation, telling your medical school shows that you have insight into the impact your condition may have on patients, your fellow students, and yourself. This is a crucial factor in relation to health and fitness to practice. So actually, you've got this in writing from the General Medical Council themselves. Doctors seek help. And if you choose to do so, that doesn't make you less of a doctor. That makes you more. That means you're really doing it right. I think it's also worth thinking about the stories at play within medicine as a field of work, not just informing our sense of what a doctor is, but we absorb all sorts of stuff around us all the time that shapes our interactions and our practice as well. So there is a whole field called narrative medicine. And I think, just as I've said, stories are how humans work, how humans make sense of understanding, as Hurwitz and Cushing put it here, that happens in medical cases as well. A narrative is the form in which concerns about health are framed by patients, When they tell you what's going on for them, they'll be telling you their story. Their relatives, too, will be trying to make sense of what's happening for a loved one by making it into a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you will then make a story of it when you work out what are the important things here, what do I need to do, how do I communicate this to my colleagues. Max Cooper and Carl Fernandez are clinicians based at BSMS. And in this very recent article, then they even pointed out that having an openness to stories and the emotional floatiness between the hard and fact measurable numbers of a medical case promotes visual learning, kindles imagination in a way that supports learners in thinking outside the box. And indeed, I would argue that, a huge part of the patient's experience goes beyond the measurable numbers, and it is about the emotional content of their story between the numbers. And what's more, Rita Sharon, who I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who is one of the real godparents of narrative medicine as a discipline, points out that it is better as a clinician to know something about your affective responses, how you respond emotionally to the stories you engage with, whether that's on television or in real life. To explore those emotions honestly, instead of trying to extend energy, trying to make your feelings conform to an idealized model of bottomless compassion, or bringing to your encounter with a patient a confused and defended affective, that is to say, emotional state, or to even just push down or away your unwelcome feelings, whether that's unwelcome because they feel too much or because even they just feel like an absence of emotion. Whatever's going on for you, it's real. And you deserve to acknowledge it. And by acknowledging it, you might understand it, and that might help your practice improve even further. And I'm very glad to say that here at BSMS, I think a lot of our work in student wellbeing and advice is actually about helping students understand this stuff, helping students understand that it's okay to be struggling, and giving students permission in a way, personal permission, helping them permit themselves to seek help. So we have this statistic from the last academic year, 24-25 academic year, that around about 52.5% of the undergraduate medical student body had contact with our service last year. And I'm seeing that as, this isn't to say that there were lots of problems going on that shouldn't have been. Life happens, like I say. In fact, common topics that came up were just emotional, personal issues, relationship stuff, friendship stuff, family stuff, mental health. It can happen to a lot of us that we have mental health issues. And so that's a common thing. Physical health, how these things impact on the course, how you can therefore overcome that impact and continue and demonstrate your abilities and learn from the experience. So it's nice to know that, yeah, we're getting, I think, we can see that generations of students from BSMS are getting more and more emotionally literate and able to seek help when they need it. Some of them even say some very nice things about our service, which is lovely. But I'll skip on because we're coming towards the end of my time to be speaking to you. So to finish this chapter of our collective story as people interested in medical education and medical practice, I think the morals, the lessons to learn from this story are it's okay to ask when you need help. It's actually part of how you succeed as a medic in training, as a human being, perhaps. As I say, we are social animals. Don't wait until it's too late. Look after yourself. There's so many easy, simple ways to do it. Regular good food, a bit of exercise. Don't have to slog your guts out in the gym. Just go for a walk. It's fine. Take time to rest. One of my most common things I say to students is you shouldn't be working all the time, however demanding and hard and satisfying a medicine degree can be. Make sure you have at least half an hour at the end of the day to just sit back and watch some telly and just relax, see your friends, have fun. It's not supposed to be just work. And that is the end of my talk today. So thank you very much for listening. I shall stop sharing. And if you do have some questions, then by all means, type them in and Agatha and I can give you answers.
Jon, thank you so much for that talk. It was So, some fascinating ideas and also a really important message kind of at the end as well. So, thank you so much for that. I
It's
mean,
a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.
oh, I was struck by so many things, John. I've written lots of notes. I don't want to take up all the time from other people's questions, but it was just, thinking about that idea of composure, I found that really striking to think about, being able to understand your kind of your own story is actually maybe a part of like of wellness, right? Of like being kind of physically and psychologically well is to be able to, was it about feeling calm and like you have control over your narrative? But that
Mm.
was super interesting. And also, I was thinking about, I think maybe it was Robin Dunbar when you're talking about what Robin Dunbar had to say about evolution and the way that humans, if you can spot unusual things, you can kind of spot patterns and spot when things are different and then communicate to others about it. I was like, well, isn't that kind of exactly what a doctor has to do?
Well,
You know,
indeed, absolutely. Yes, yeah.
someone who can
Yeah.
really spot those, when the story of, I don't know, someone's health or someone's body, if something's changed or something unusual has happened, and be able to then put that into context and put that into a story. So um, it's really made me think, John, and I
Oh,
can see
oh,
some
that's great to know.
questions.
I feel like I should just purely for the sake of academic fairness, I should say I think it wasn't Dunbar's study that I got that particular thing from, but I did kind of give that implication without meaning to. So I'm very sorry about that. It was a group of authors. The lead author was called Bietti. I can't remember the first name, but Bietti. Yes, it's a really interesting paper, well worth looking at. Mm.
Thanks, John. Fabulous. Well, I can see some questions are coming in, so let's turn our attention to those. Okay. Well, Martha has asked, what do you think is the most positive representation of being a doctor in film or TV?
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I really like that. Oh gosh, I think one that springs to mind. I don't know if yeah. Yeah. I'll go with this one for now. But I'm going to really enjoy thinking about that one, Martha. Thank you very much. Um, is in the program ER from the 90s. Then I can remember in a sort of like about midway through its run, there was an episode in which Carter, played by Noah Wiley, who's now in the pit as a much as an older, more grizzled looking doctor. Um, yeah. Then he'd sort of recently become the more sort of experienced senior person in the cast. And there was a junior, I think it's still a student actually, who was working with him, and they, without wanting to be too grim or anything, but they had an emergency case where somebody had been brought in unconscious, and I think their heart had stopped, and this junior doctor had just sort of decided last minute, no, I'm going to see if I can restart it, and actually disobeyed what they were told, and did it, got the heart pumping again without thinking about the wider context, and so actually that they ended up with a patient who they could have called it, let the patient pass, and just had to give bad news to the parents of the family, but instead they ended up with a patient whose heart was beating, so they couldn't do that anymore, but there was no brain activity going on. And so it was a really difficult situation. I'm sorry, this is quite a sort of, it's a fictional case. But it really and in it, then Carter says to this guy, I can't remember the other guy's name. He's saying like, you really shouldn't have done that. And the guy starts saying, "Oh yeah, I saved his life." And he said, "No, you did it to see if you could."
Mm,
And it really underlined for me that sort of, oh gosh, yes, it's so easily understandable that somebody who's driven to acquire these technical skills, which is what it comes down to, might have lost sight of that. And you could see it on this guy's face. God, yeah, he's right. And then over time, that guy became a much more compassionate, all-round, holistic doctor. And it's something between the two characters, that interaction, because Carter had been quite a sort of cocky young student to start with in the series, and then became this much more worldly wise emotionally wise character. That growth that both of them showed, I thought that was really important. So yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully that answers
Yeah.
the question, Martha.
I think that's a great answer. And yeah, I mean, that reminds me of, what you were saying in your talk about uh, kind of troubling that binary of goodies and baddies, right? And actually being able to see that characters and also real people can change and grow and develop. And you might start out as, yeah, this kind of cocky, even villainous character, but things can change and grow and develop. So
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Yeah.
I mean, I just want to say quickly as well, Martha, that this is kind of an answer that's opposite to what you asked about a positive representation. But for people that know me, like my guilty pleasure is Australian soap operas, and
Oh,
and my favorite thing is that all of the doctors, there's normally one character who's a doctor in the soap operas, and they can do heart surgery, and they're also a pediatrician, and they're also a neurologist and can do brain surgery, and they're able to do absolutely everything. And it's just not it's not the case, is it? You become a very specialized doctor who can do one thing extremely,
yes.
one type of surgery extremely well. You're not an all-rounder necessarily. So um, brilliant. Okay. Sirad has asked, are there any books or movies that you might recommend watching or reading to support maybe people who are looking to apply? They've said specifically about medical personal statements, but I wonder also kind of about, I don't know, exploring those kind of stories within medicine or stories of medicine, people who are aspiring medics.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. Yeah. Well, and my colleague Lizzie actually, she suggested that it's worth thinking about um, This Is Going to Hurt, which was
Mm.
it was originally a book by an actual working clinician called Adam Kay, which was then turned into a BBC series. And so the BBC series does sort of fictionalize and dramatize events a bit more. And so, in some ways, I'd say go to the book rather than the series because I think the series, from what I gather, sort of exaggerates the stresses of being a doctor, and so maybe doesn't quite give the most accurate it will show you the stuff which isn't being shown in other series where it's all perfect and it's all fine, but maybe it doesn't show the good stuff enough as well. The book is a much more honest and reflective, I think, exploration of, yeah, it's challenging, but here's how we get through it, I suppose, really. So
That's a great recommendation. I've heard
mm.
I've heard really good things about that one too. Um, Fabulous. So Veronica has asked, what would be your number one piece of advice in student how can student unions support students in any way? And I guess we could think about the student union, but maybe also uh, the university in general,
Yeah,
the
sure.
medical.
No, that's a really good one. I think well, so I think in terms of the support that's offered, I think being willing to listen to students' experiences is really
Mm,
important. I like to think we do that pretty well here at ours. I think there's a lot of emphasis given to student feedback and regular termly meetings, at least a couple every term, with either a whole year group or with student voted representatives to say, okay, what's going on? How can we iron out some of the wrinkles that are happening in terms of providing facilities or how the course is working for you, that sort of thing. Um, and I think anticipating needs rather than just reacting as well.
mm,
Having services already to go that can provide for, you know, make sure that places are accessible to whatever anybody's mobility situation might be. Make sure that there are quiet spaces if people need to get away and just process things a bit. having funding available. I think, obviously it's a hard time for a lot of organizations at the moment. It's a hard time for a lot of individuals as well. And my personal view is very much that nobody should be disadvantaged in following educational aims because of their income. And so, yeah, taking care of those underlying things and anticipating them already so that when other little blips happen, the students are already a bit more cushioned and have the resources to just ride over the bumps, I think. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Thank you, John. Um, Jashitha has asked, what aspects of medical TV shows do you think accurately reflect real life medicine, and which elements are misleading or unrealistic?
Well, Agatha, you touched on a really good one there earlier, where people can do everything, and I get like there was a phase in the late '90s when it seemed like every TV show was looking for an opportunity to show somebody doing a tracheotomy
With a
the sleeve of a
biro.
pen, yeah, which I'm told is just doesn't work. So, yeah. Now, I should say at this stage, I'm not a clinician, so I know what I know of this stuff is from talking to the clinicians that I work with at BSMS, really. Um, but yeah, the most accurate stuff, I think sometimes actually is the stuff which shows that a shift isn't all about the huge, big, dramatic cases. Actually,
Mm.
a lot of the time it's about a lot of waiting and a lot of processing some quite lots and lots of little things rather than one huge big um, life-changing thing really,
Yeah.
but that for each of those individual people they still really need your help and they're grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's remind me of one of our to plug our YouTube playlist with all of our previous monthly lectures on. It reminds me of Dr. Neil Singh did a talk called How to Save a Life, and he
Hmm.
kind of started by talking about, his when he was younger, he would kind of wanted to be this hero doctor who kind of swooped in an emergency situation and, put people back together. But Dr. Singh is now a GP, and he understands kind of being a hero and saving people's lives is actually starting out as these more preventative things, or what can be done before we're in the emergency room, to stop people getting into like a life-threatening situation. It just
Yeah.
reminded me of that.
No, absolutely great. I find him so inspiring, Neil. Actually, I think
Yeah.
he's a really wonderful doctor and a really wonderful communicator about the important stuff about being a doctor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, John. I think we're coming to the end of our time now. I just wanted to say as well, we've got a really nice comment from Eucolia in the comments saying that the way you deliver your storytelling is impeccable. And
Thank you.
it's been a real treat to listen to your talk, John. So thank you so much for being with us and giving up your time and bringing us some really interesting ideas to think about. And like I said, some really important messages about asking for help. As someone who, and the people who are in the audience being people who really want to help others, how important it is to be able to ask for help for yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody, and good luck with whatever you go out there to do. Enjoy it.
Brilliant. Yes, thank you everyone. Take care and hope to see you all soon. Bye.